There is a part of your mind that does not want you to be free. It does not announce itself as an enemy. It speaks with your voice, wears your memories, uses your fears, and convinces you that it is protecting you from pain. But what if the protection is the prison? What if the voice that says, "Be realistic, be careful, remember what happened," is not wisdom, but the ego defending the only world where it can survive? Today, you are going to see the law your ego hides from you. The outside world is not attacking you. It is reflecting the identity the ego keeps alive inside you. Most people who find their way to teachings like this one have already tried to escape the ego by fighting it directly. They argue with their thoughts. They catch a fearful belief and talk back to it. They build routines, enforce rules on themselves, recite affirmations in the mirror, and try to control every behavior that might lead them back to pain. It feels like discipline. It feels like progress. But listen carefully, because this is where most people lose their power. Every time you argue with the ego on its own terms, you have already lost. You have already accepted the premise that the ego is a problem outside you that must be defeated from the outside. When you spend your days analyzing why you are the way you are, cataloging every wound, identifying every limiting belief like a detective gathering evidence at a crime scene, you are not dismantling the ego. You are handing it a microphone. The ego loves investigation when the investigation keeps the ego at the center of the story. It loves being discussed, dissected, diagnosed, and labeled, because as long as your attention is fixed on the ego as an object in your mind, you remain the one watching it, and the watcher and the ego remain locked together in the same closed room. The same trap appears when you turn outward and begin assigning blame. When the world feels wrong, the ego offers you an explanation that feels like clarity, but functions like a chain. It points at the person who hurt you, the circumstance that failed you, the past that shaped you, and it says, there is the cause. There is what you must fix, fight, or escape. And so you spend your energy on the reflection, pulling at the mirror, demanding it change, unaware that the image in the glass has not moved because the one standing in front of it has not moved. This is the false strategy, not weakness, not failure, just a misunderstanding of where the cause actually lives. Before we go deeper, I want to ask something of you that is more serious than a like or a share. I want to ask you to make a commitment right now for the full duration of this video to observe what happens inside you as you listen. Not to agree immediately, not to resist defensively, but to watch, to notice when something lands and a part of you wants to push it away, to notice when a word triggers a tightening in your chest, a sudden urge to argue, a quiet whisper that says, "This does not apply to me." That reaction is data. That reaction is the ego showing you exactly where it lives. This kind of attention is not comfortable. What you are about to encounter is not a flattering portrait. The ego will be named, its mechanics will be exposed, and the law it has been hiding from you will be brought into the light. There may be moments where you feel accused. I want to be direct with you. Nothing in this teaching is designed to make you feel like a broken person or a guilty one. Responsibility is not punishment. Responsibility is the door. And the only way to walk through it is to first be willing to see what is standing in front of it. So here is what I am asking. Stay present. When the ego flinches, do not follow the flinch. When the voice inside says, yes, but in my case, pause before you let that sentence complete itself. Not because your situation is not real or complex, but because the part of you that immediately generates a special exception is the exact part of this teaching is addressing. That is not a coincidence. A, That is the mechanism working in real time, and you have just been given the rare gift of watching it activate. This is your pact: full attention, honest observation, and the willingness to be temporarily uncomfortable in exchange for something that may shift the foundation of how you experience your own life. That is not a small offer, and it is not a casual one. If you are still here, if you have not clicked away, some part of you already knows that what you are about to hear is something the other part of you has been hiding. You have been here before, not here, in front of this video, but here in the feeling. The specific details change. The name of the person changes. The job changes. The city changes. The relationship changes. But the feeling has a signature you recognize, the feeling of being unseen, or of being abandoned before you can be loved, or of working harder than everyone around you while receiving less, or of trusting someone and being proven foolish for it. You have walked into that feeling through a dozen different doors, and each time you thought it was the door that was the problem. This is the signature of the ego operating undisturbed. The ego does not need the same event to repeat. It only needs the same state to persist. And because the inner state keeps broadcasting the same frequency, reality keeps delivering the same emotional content in new packaging. The ego then performs its most convincing trick. It points to the new face on the old wound and says, "You see, it is happening again. It is the world doing this to you." And you believe it because the evidence is right there, real and present and undeniable. The ego does not fear pain. This is important enough to say again. The ego does not fear pain. It fears dissolving. And pain, paradoxically, is one of the most powerful tools the ego uses to maintain its existence. Suffering creates urgency. Urgency creates focus. Focus on the problem keeps the problem alive, keeps the self that has the problem alive, keeps the ego as the central narrator of your experience. Without the wound, what story would it tell? Without the enemy, what would it be defending? So the pattern repeats, not because the world is conspiring against you, and not because you are cursed, and not because you are fundamentally broken in a way that cannot be touched. The pattern repeats because the inner instruction has not changed. You keep sending the same command from the same identity, and the world, which is not your enemy but your mirror, keeps showing you the same face. The face is uncomfortable, but it is also information, and it is the most honest information you have access to. Look at the pattern in your life right now, not with self-judgment, but with genuine curiosity. Where do you keep arriving at the same emotional destination, regardless of which road you take? Where does anxiety follow you from one situation into the next? Where does the feeling of not being enough, or not being safe, or not being chosen keep showing up in fresh disguise? That pattern is not evidence of a world that is broken. It is evidence of a broadcast that has not yet been interrupted. And that broadcast, unlike the world outside you, is something you can actually reach. Here is where the teaching becomes uncomfortable, and here is where I ask you to hold your commitment from earlier. The pain you are experiencing, whatever form it takes, is not primarily being caused by what is happening outside you. The pain is being maintained by identification, by the belief, usually operating below the level of your conscious awareness, that what you are seeing is the cause of what you are feeling, rather than the reflection of what you have already been holding as true about yourself and the world. This is not about denying that real things happen. Real things happen. People behave badly. Circumstances collapse without warning. Loss is real. Grief is real. There is no part of this teaching that asks you to pretend otherwise. What it asks you to examine is this: why does the same emotional reality keep returning? Why, when one difficult person exits your life, does another who produces the same interior feeling take their place? Why does relief never last? Why does the next thing always carry the echo of the last? The event is not manufacturing the emotion from nothing. The emotion is being retrieved from a place that already held it, a state that was already primed to recognize and respond to that particular frequency of experience. A Course in Miracles makes a distinction that is worth holding carefully. It teaches that we do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. This is not poetry. This is a description of a perceptual mechanism. The ego filters experience through the lens of its own beliefs, wounds, and identity structures. Then it presents that filtered perception as objective reality. You do not see a person, you see your projection of that person, layered with every meaning your inner state has assigned. You do not see a situation, you see your interpretation of it, already running through the software of your self-concept before you are even consciously aware of it. Pain is therefore evidence of a very specific thing. The ego has successfully completed its assignment. Its assignment is to make the outer world appear to be the cause. When you suffer, the ego whispers, "Now do you see? Now do you understand why I told you to be careful, to protect yourself, to remember what happened last time?" The pain becomes proof of the ego's worldview. And the ego's worldview becomes the lens through which every new experience is filtered. This is the loop, and it is sealed from the inside. The moment you believe that a person, a memory, a circumstance, or a condition outside you is the source of your inner state, you have handed your power to something that cannot give it back. Not because the world is cruel, but because the world is not where the power lives. You cannot change your inner state by rearranging the outer world, for the same reason that you cannot change your face by rearranging the glass. The pain is real, but its maintenance is coming from somewhere you have not yet looked clearly, and that somewhere is where this teaching is pointing. This is not about blaming yourself. Let that be heard plainly. This is not about standing in the ruins of your life and being told it was all your fault. This is about reclaiming the place where change can actually begin. Because if the state was produced within you, even partially, even unknowingly, then it can be changed within you. And that, for the first time, gives you a door. The ego does not want you to see that door, because the moment you do, the ego's central argument collapses, and the ego will do almost anything to prevent its own collapse. So now you are standing at the edge of something. You can feel it. There is a law operating in your life that the ego has been concealing. Not because the ego is evil, not because you are a victim of some sinister force, but because the ego is, by its very nature, structured around a specific lie. That lie is this: something outside you is the cause of what you experience inside you. Everything the ego does, every defense, every story, every pattern, every habit of perception, is organized around protecting that lie from exposure. But here is what the ego cannot afford for you to discover. The moment you genuinely understand the mechanism of inner causation, the ego loses its most important lever. It loses the ability to hold your attention hostage to the outer world. It loses its job. And the ego, like any structure designed for survival, will resist its own unemployment with extraordinary creativity. This is why people who encounter these teachings intellectually do not always transform. They learn the concept. They say, "Yes, I am the creator of my reality." they nod along, and then they walk back into their day and continue reacting to the mirror as though it is the cause. Because the ego has not been exposed at the level where it actually operates. It has only been addressed at the level of ideas, and ideas without depth do not disrupt the identity that generates the old experience. What you need is not more information. What you need is to see the mechanism itself, to catch the ego not as a theory, but as a living operation inside your own awareness right now. To see how it takes every stimulus from the outer world and converts it into evidence for the story it already decided was true before the stimulus arrived. When you see that, not just understand it, but actually see it happening, something begins to shift that no affirmation and no vision board could move. There is a law hidden beneath the surface of your daily experience. It has been working the entire time. It has been shaping what you see, who you attract, what you expect, and how deeply you believe you deserve to receive what you desire. It has been the silent hand behind every repeating pattern, every unexplained return of the same wound, every near miss and every collapse that seemed to come from nowhere. The ego knows this law. It knows it because the ego is built in direct opposition to it. And in the next part of this teaching, you are going to see it for yourself. The hidden law is this: the world you perceive is not presenting itself to a neutral observer. It is being generated, shaped, and filtered by a state of identity that precedes the perception. You do not first see the world and then form an opinion about yourself. You first hold an assumption about yourself and then see a world that confirms it. This is the sequence the ego has inverted. This is the reversal the ego depends on to survive. And this reversal is so seamless, so constant, so deeply embedded in the ordinary rhythm of your thinking that it takes a significant act of inner honesty to even begin to question it. The word state is important here. A state is not a passing mood. A state is not a thought you are having. A state is the inner atmosphere in which all of your thoughts, moods, perceptions, and reactions are occurring. It is the ground level of your identity at any given moment. And most people live their entire lives inside a single state, or a narrow range of states, cycling between them automatically, never recognizing that the state is a position that can be deliberately changed. Instead, they experience the state as simply what life is, as simply who they are. The ego's survival depends on you not recognizing the state as a variable. The ego needs you to believe that the state is a response to the world, that you feel this way because of what happened, because of what they did, because of the conditions you were born into, because of the losses you have endured. As long as you believe the state is caused by the outside, the ego remains secure. You will keep trying to fix the outside. You will keep trying to change the people, the circumstances, the conditions, and the ego will keep observing the attempt and noting that the state remains exactly where it was, which it will interpret as further proof that the problem is outside. Now look at this closely. If the state generates the perception, and the perception generates the interpretation, and the interpretation generates the response, and the response shapes the behavior, and the behavior shapes the environment, and the environment confirms the state, then what you have is not a life being lived. What you have is a loop being repeated, a closed circuit. And the entry point, the one place in that circuit where a genuine interruption can occur, is not at the level of the environment. It is at the level of the state, not fixing the outside, shifting from within. This is not a metaphor for positive thinking. This is not a rebranded instruction to smile and pretend everything is fine. The state includes your deepest assumptions about who you are. what you deserve, whether you are safe, whether love is reliable, whether the world is fundamentally hostile or fundamentally responsive. These assumptions operate like software running in the background of every experience you have. You are not consciously choosing them moment to moment. They are choosing your experience for you, while your conscious attention is occupied with the reflection they are producing. Neville Goddard described this with a clarity that still cuts through decades later. He taught that man's imagination, or in the language of this teaching, the inner state, the inner assumption, is the real and eternal world. He taught that everything in the world of sense, the people, the events, the conditions, is the outpicturing of an inner state. He did not say this as philosophy. He said it as a workable law, as a principle with real application, as the ground truth beneath every experience of both suffering and liberation. When you hold an assumption that you are unworthy, the world does not argue with you. The world agrees, not because it is conspiring against you, but because perception filters for confirmation. You will notice the evidence of your unworthiness. You will miss or dismiss the evidence against it. You will attract, through the behavior generated by the state, conditions that confirm the assumption. And the ego will stand at the edge of that confirmation and say, "You see, you were right to believe what you believed." The assumption generates the evidence. The evidence reinforces the assumption. The ego presents this as the world proving something, but what is actually happening is the state displaying itself. The law the ego hides is therefore not mysterious. It is mechanical. It is precise. It operates without exception and without favoritism. It does not care whether you have spent years in spiritual practice or whether you have never heard these words before. It applies with equal consistency to every human being on this planet. The inner state creates the display. The display reflects the state, and the state can be changed, not by fighting what is being displayed, but by entering a different state at the level where the display originates. That is the law. That is what the ego does not want you to know. A Course in Miracles opens with a statement so radical that most people who read it do not yet know what to do with it. It says, "Nothing I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place, means anything." This is not nihilism. It is a surgical strike at the ego's most fundamental claim, that the outer world is the source of meaning, the source of cause, the source of identity. The Course is not teaching that the outer world does not exist. It is teaching that the meaning you assign to it is not coming from it. The meaning is coming from you, from the state you are inhabiting, from the identity through which you are filtering every perception. The ego is defined in A Course in Miracles with precision that is worth sitting with. The ego is described as a belief in separation, a belief that you are separate from the source of your own well-being, separate from love, separate from wholeness, separate from other people, in a way that makes them fundamentally threatening or fundamentally necessary. And from that core belief in separation, the entire architecture of suffering is constructed. Fear arises because separation means vulnerability. Defense arises because vulnerability requires protection. Attack arises because protection generates the need for preemptive action. And all of this, every layer of it, presents itself as a response to the outer world while being entirely generated by the inner belief. Neville Goddard approached the same territory through the language of states, assumptions, and imagination. He taught that the I am, the pure fact of your awareness, your consciousness knowing itself as being, is the operant power, not a power. The power the one that determines what the world presents back to you. He was not speaking about willpower or determination in the conventional sense. He was pointing to the level of identity, the level of assumption, the level of what you take yourself to be in your deepest, most unguarded moments as the creative instruction that the world is perpetually executing. The ego, in Neville's framework, corresponds to the false state, the assumed identity of limitation, separation, unworthiness, or fear that has been accepted as the self. It is not evil. It is a case of mistaken identity. You have taken the mask for the face. You have taken the conditioned role for the living awareness beneath it. And because the living awareness is incredibly faithful, it continues to express whatever state it is currently occupying, without judgment, without resistance, without mercy. The world becomes whatever the assumed identity declares, not because the world is obedient in a magical sense, but because perception, behavior, expectation, and choice all flow from identity, and the world responds to all of them. This is the mechanism of projection that both teachings illuminate from different angles. Projection does not mean you are imagining things that are not there. Projection means you are assigning meanings, causes, and identities to what is there based on the inner state you are bringing to the encounter. You project fear onto a neutral situation and perceive a threat. You project inadequacy onto a new opportunity and perceive an inevitable failure. You project rejection onto a moment of ordinary distance and feel abandoned. The situation does not produce the perception. The state produces the perception, and the situation becomes the screen on which the state displays itself. What both teachings agree on, and what the ego cannot tolerate, is this: the mechanism of projection can be recognized. It can be interrupted, not by fighting the projections themselves, which only deepens the investment in them, but by identifying the state that is generating them and choosing, from the level of the I am, from the level of the operant power, to occupy a different identity. Not a performed identity, not a forced positive attitude, a genuinely different assumption about who you are and what the world is. The spiritual authority in these teachings is not asking you to deny what you see. It is asking you to understand what you are seeing with. It is asking you to recognize that the instrument of perception, the self that is looking, is not a fixed thing. It is a state, and states can shift. When Neville said that revision is one of the most powerful practices available to a human being, he was not talking about rewriting history for comfort. He was talking about going back into the inner state that generated a painful experience and replacing it with a different assumption, a different identity, a different felt reality, so that the outpicturing that followed would have no inner authority to sustain itself. This is the hidden law translated from spiritual authority into practical intelligence. You are not a passive receiver of a world that happens to you. You are the operant power expressing a state that the world is faithfully reflecting. The ego keeps that translation from happening because the moment it completes, the ego's entire justification for its existence evaporates. The ego exists to navigate a threatening world. But if the world is a mirror and the threat is being projected from within, then the ego's job was never protection. It was always perpetuation, perpetuating the state of separation that keeps the self small enough to need defending. This does not mean you are to blame for every painful thing that has ever happened to you. This is not a teaching that instructs you to absorb mistreatment as a spiritual lesson or to stay in harmful situations as evidence of your inner work. There is a distinction, and it matters. Recognizing that your inner state is the cause of your perception is not the same as saying the world owes you nothing or that all circumstances are equally acceptable. It is saying that the place where your freedom lives is not in the circumstances. It is in the state that precedes and shapes how you meet them. That is where the ego cannot follow you. That is where its power ends. Imagine a person who has worn a mask for so long that they have forgotten it is a mask. Not a theatrical mask worn on a stage, but a mask that grew onto the face gradually, one layer at a time, beginning in childhood, thickening with every wound, hardening with every disappointment, until by the time they are grown, the mask is so seamless, so natural, so completely continuous with their sense of self, that when someone suggests it might not be their real face, the response is not curiosity. The response is offense. This is the ego, not a demon, not a foreign invader, a mask that has been mistaken for a face. And like any mask, it does not have eyes of its own. It borrows yours. It does not have a voice of its own. It borrows yours. It interprets every experience through its own rigid features: suspicion, defensiveness, fear, separation, the need to be right, the need to be safe, the need to keep the world arranged in a way that does not threaten its structure. And because it is wearing your face, every interpretation it makes feels like your own clear thinking. The mask does not know it is a mask. This is the most important part of the metaphor. The mask has no awareness of itself as a construction. It experiences itself as the truth, as the real response to a real world. When the mask feels threatened, it believes the threat is external. When the mask feels pain, it believes the pain is being caused from outside. When the mask tightens around old wounds, it interprets that tightening as wisdom, as the natural and correct response to a world that has proven itself dangerous. The mask has an entire library of evidence organized in support of its reality, and it guards that library with everything it has. Now here is where the metaphor deepens. The mask has a shadow. When the mask encounters the world, it projects a shadow double onto everything it sees. The shadow double is the ego's version of what it is seeing, layered with its own fears, its own judgments, its own unresolved wounds. You do not meet a person. The mask meets its shadow double of that person, filtered through every previous betrayal, every childhood template, every unhealed assumption about what people do and what they ultimately mean. And then the mask reacts to the shadow double as though it were the real person. And the real person, sensing that they are not being seen, but projected onto, responds in ways that confirm the projection. And the mask says, "You see, this is what people are like. I was right. This is not a figure of speech. This is a description of the mechanics of every repeated relational wound." The mask cannot see people clearly because seeing clearly would require taking itself off. And taking itself off would feel like annihilation. To the mask, no self feels identical to death. So it keeps the shadow double in place, keeps the projection running, keeps the world shaped into something that justifies its continued presence on your face. Remove the mask, even briefly, and what is underneath is not nothing. What is underneath is the awareness that was always there before the mask was assembled. Pure, undisturbed, prior to fear, prior to the wound, prior to the self-concept that the ego has been elaborately defending. Neville called it the real man. A Course in Miracles calls it the Christ mind, the right mind, the awareness beneath the ego's thought system. Different languages for the same territory. The consciousness that is not defined by its history, not limited by its projections, not imprisoned by the identity the mask has been performing. You have had moments of this, moments where something dissolved and you were simply present, without the narrator, without the commentary, without the weight of the story the ego tells about who you are and what the world owes you. Those moments feel like relief, not because something was added to you, but because something temporarily released its grip. The mask loosened. And in that loosening, you discovered that what was underneath was not terrifying. It was spacious. It was calm. It was, in the truest sense of the word, free. The ego will not tell you about those moments. It will not remind you that the space beneath it is not dangerous. It will point to the next threat, the next potential wound, the next evidence that the world requires its vigilance. Because if you remember that the awareness beneath the mask is fundamentally intact, fundamentally at peace, the mask becomes optional, and optional is the last thing the ego can afford to become. So when you sit with this teaching, when you begin to notice the mask operating in your daily life, do not try to tear it off violently. That is still the ego's approach. Aggressive self-improvement, warfare against the self. Instead, simply notice. Simply observe from beneath the mask, from the awareness that is reading these words right now, the layer that is being worn over it. The observer is already free. The mask is already a construction. What remains is only the courage to stop mistaking one for the other. There is a painful irony at the center of most spiritual and psychological effort. The harder you fight the ego, the stronger its position becomes. This is not a paradox invented to confuse you. It is a description of a real mechanical consequence. Every time you engage with the ego's projection as though it were a real external threat, every time you defend your innocence, chase down evidence that you are right, confront the person who triggered you, or demand that the outer world rearrange itself to confirm your healing, you have reinforced the only framework in which the ego exists. The framework where the outside is the cause and the inside is the effect. Think about the act of defending yourself. You are in a conflict, real or imagined, and the ego presents you with an urgent brief. Your identity is under attack. Your worth is being questioned. Your reality is being contradicted, and you must respond. So, you respond. You explain yourself, justify your actions, argue your point, prove your case. And even if you win the argument, even if the other person concedes, even if the outer situation resolves in your favor, notice what has not changed. The inner state that needed defending. The state that produced the desire to prove something still exists. The state that requires external validation to feel whole still exists. You won the outer battle and left the inner cause completely untouched. This is what it means to strengthen the ego through resistance. Resistance is not the absence of engagement with the ego. Resistance includes the engagement itself. Every time you take the ego seriously as a thing to be defeated, you are accepting the ego's self-description as a real and significant entity that requires a significant response. The ego inflates in proportion to the seriousness with which it is regarded. Even the most sincere spiritual warrior, if they are approaching their ego as an enemy to vanquish, is feeding the very structure they are trying to dissolve. Look at this in the context of manifestation. Many people who are sincerely working with these principles find themselves caught in a cycle that feels like spiritual failure. They set an intention. They affirm the desired reality. They do the inner work. And then they look at the outer world to check whether it is working. And the outer world, which operates on a delay, has not yet shifted to confirm the inner work. And so, the checking itself becomes an expression of doubt. and the doubt is an expression of the old state. And the old state is the very thing they were trying to replace. The outer struggle to confirm the inner shift actually cancels the inner shift by reinstating the original position of lack. The ego loves the checking. The ego loves the impatient surveillance of the outer world for evidence of change, because as long as you are checking, you are operating from the state of someone who does not yet have what they desire. And the operant power, the I am, the awareness that generates experience, is faithfully executing the state of the checker, not the state of the one who has already arrived. This is not cruel. It is simply consistent. The mirror reflects what stands before it. If what stands before it is the state of anxious uncertainty, the reflection will confirm anxious uncertainty, regardless of how many affirmations accompany the checking. The outer struggle also reinforces the old state by keeping your identity tethered to the problem. When your primary attention is on what is wrong, what has not changed, what has been done to you, and what must be fixed or overcome, your sense of self organizes itself around the problem as a reference point. You become the person dealing with this, the person recovering from that, the person trying to break free of the other thing. These are identities. They are not descriptions of a neutral situation. They are states being inhabited and therefore expressed and therefore reflected. The identity of the one struggling is still an identity. And the mirror does not care that it is an identity of effort and sincerity. It reflects the identity, not the intention. This is not a reason to stop caring about your life. This is not a teaching that asks you to become passive or indifferent to your circumstances. It is a teaching about the sequence. The sequence the ego has inverted must be restored. Inner cause first, outer change as a consequence. Not outer change first, then inner peace as a reward. The ego inserts itself between those two and tells you the outer change must come before the inner state can shift. That is the inversion. That is the hidden law in reverse. And every moment you accept it, you hand the mirror your current state and ask it to show you something different. It cannot. It will not. It is doing exactly what mirrors do. When you understand this deeply, not as a concept, but as something you can feel operating in your own experience, a different kind of effort becomes possible. Not the effort of fighting the outer world, or policing your own thoughts, or constructing the perfect spiritual routine to finally break through. The effort of simply entering a different state, dropping into the assumption of the fulfilled identity, not performing it, not pretending it, actually occupying it, the way an actor fully enters a character, not with one foot in the old story and one foot in the new one, but entirely present in the new assumption. That is where the ego loses its grip, not in the battle, in the shift. So, what does it actually mean to withdraw the projection and return to the inner cause? This is where the teaching must become something more than a collection of truths that feel powerful to hear, but dissolve by morning. This is where you cross from understanding the law to applying it. And the first thing to know is that the application does not begin with affirmations or visualizations or any technique imposed from the outside. It begins with recognition. Recognition means this: in any moment where you feel the familiar pull of the ego's narrative, the quick rise of defensiveness, the ache of rejection, the flare of resentment, the cold certainty that you are being treated unfairly, you pause, not to suppress it, not to explain it away. You simply pause and you ask one question: what state am I in right now? Not what is happening to me. What state am I in? because what is happening to you is always secondary to what state is meeting what is happening. The state is the cause. The event is the occasion. When you ask that question honestly, you begin to develop a kind of inner literacy. You start to recognize states the way you recognize faces. You notice the state of defensiveness, which feels like a kind of forward lean toward the outer world, a tightening readiness to counter something. You notice the state of lack, which feels like a specific kind of hollow pressure, a reaching outward toward something that is not here yet. You notice the state of unworthiness, which is often quieter, more pervasive, more like a tint on every perception than a single sharp feeling. You learn to name these states, not to judge them, but to stop being invisible inside them. This is what witnessing means in practice. It does not mean watching from a detached philosophical distance. It means bringing your consciousness into direct contact with the state, rather than letting the state use your consciousness to run its programs unobserved. The ego operates in the dark. When consciousness turns toward it, not in condemnation, but in genuine observation, something begins to loosen. The state that seemed solid and inevitable reveals itself as a position, not a fact, and a position can be vacated. After recognition comes the withdrawal of the projection. This is subtle, but it is critical. You take back the causation you have assigned to the outer world, not by denying that the outer world exists, or by telling yourself that what happened did not affect you, but by relocating the source. You say to yourself, clearly and without self-punishment, this person did not cause this feeling. This situation did not produce this state. The state was already here, and it has been using this event as its justification. I am not a victim of this moment. I am the carrier of a state that is meeting this moment. And that means the power lives with the state, not with the event. That relocation is not small. It is one of the most significant internal movements available to a human being. Because in that moment, the mirror stops being a threat and becomes information. The outer circumstance stops being the enemy and becomes a diagnostic tool. You stop asking, how do I change this? And you begin asking, what state was I in that produced this experience? And what state do I want to enter now? That question is where the operant power lives. The next movement is the assumption of the new identity. Neville was precise about this. It is not enough to think about the desired state. It is not enough to analyze it or admire it from outside. You must enter it. You must feel what it would feel like to already be the version of yourself who is not defined by the wound, who does not carry the assumption of separation, who genuinely occupies the identity of the one who is whole, loved, creative, capable, and at peace with what is. Not the one who is working toward those things, the one who already is those things at the level of assumption. This is not fantasy. This is the most rigorous internal discipline available. Because the ego will immediately object. It will produce evidence. It will list the reasons this assumption is irresponsible, premature, and disconnected from reality. And you must understand what that objection is. It is the old state attempting to reclaim its position. It is the mask asserting that it is the face. The practice is to feel the new state despite the objection, not to silence the objection, not to argue with it, to simply hold the new assumption with more conviction than the objection holds its counter-argument. Do this daily, not as a ritual of performance, but as a genuine inner repositioning. Before you enter a situation that has historically triggered the old state, pause and consciously enter the new one. After an event that has pulled you back into the old pattern, use revision. Return to the memory of the event, not to replay it painfully, but to re-experience it from the new identity. See it as you would have seen it from the fulfilled state. Feel how the fulfilled self would have responded, how the fulfilled self would have been unthreatened by what threatened you, how it would have met the same event from a different ground. This is not delusion. This is inner command. This is the operant power doing its actual work. The world will begin to confirm the new state, not immediately, not always dramatically, but structurally. You will notice different qualities in your interactions. You will find that certain triggers lose their sharpness. You will begin to meet situations that previously would have collapsed you with a steadiness that surprises you. This is not you becoming emotionless or disconnected. This is you becoming anchored at a level the ego cannot reach, at the level of the I am beneath the mask. The awareness that does not depend on the mirror's current reflection to know its own wholeness. The ego is already responding. If you have been listening honestly, some part of you has been generating counter-arguments since at least the middle of the last section. Good. That is not resistance to overcome. That is the ego showing you exactly where it lives in you, and that location is useful information. But let's address the objections directly, because the ego's backlash is one of the most predictable and misunderstood phases of this work. The first objection is usually guilt. After hearing a teaching about inner causation, the ego performs a neat maneuver. It takes the principle of responsibility and converts it into self-blame. You find yourself thinking, if I created this, if my state has been shaping my experience, then I am responsible for every bad thing that has ever happened to me. And that thought feels unbearable. So unbearable that the ego uses it as evidence that the teaching must be wrong, or that it applies to other people, but not to you. But listen, this conversion is the ego's work, not the teaching's intention. Responsibility as reclaimed power is not the same as fault. A child who is wounded in circumstances beyond their control did not create that wound by choosing the wrong state. But an adult who continues to inhabit the state generated by that childhood wound, who continues to see the world through its lens and generate experiences that confirm it, that adult does have access to a different choice. Not the child, but the adult, here, now, is the one who can do this work. The second objection is skepticism. The rational mind, which the ego frequently uses as its representative, will insist that this is unfalsifiable, that it is wishful thinking, that the outer world has demonstrably independent causes that have nothing to do with your inner state. And there is a legitimate version of this objection. Not everything that happens is a direct reflection of your personal assumptions. The world is a complex, shared experience with multiple consciousnesses contributing to it. But the relevant question is not whether the outer world is entirely your personal creation. The relevant question is whether your inner state is shaping your perception, your behavior, your choices, and your interpretation of what happens. That question, examined honestly, almost always returns the same answer: yes. And that yes is enough. The third objection is the sensory delay. This is perhaps the most practically important one to address. When you begin working at the level of the inner state, when you genuinely enter a new assumption and hold it with conviction, the outer world does not immediately rearrange itself. The existing conditions persist. The person who has been behaving in the old pattern continues to behave in the old pattern. The financial situation does not shift overnight. And the ego, which has been watching for exactly this, steps forward and says, "See, nothing changed. it is not working. Go back to what I was telling you before. This is the hardest moment of the practice, and it is the moment where most people return to the old state. But the delay is not evidence of failure. The delay is the natural interval between an inner shift and its outward confirmation. Think of it as the gap between a command sent and a display updated. The command has been given. The display is processing. What the ego calls failure is actually the lag between the new inner instruction and the old outer reflection catching up. The outer world is not instantaneous. It is layered. It has existing structures, existing relationships, existing patterns of behavior that were built to confirm the old state. These do not dissolve overnight, but they do begin to shift as the inner state that generated them is consistently replaced. The ego will also produce fear, not philosophical fear, but visceral, specific fear. It will say, if you stop defending yourself, you will be hurt. If you stop checking, you will miss something important. If you stop identifying with this story, you will not know who you are. And underneath all of that is the deepest fear of all, freedom. Because freedom means the ego is no longer necessary. And the ego experiences its own unnecessariness as extinction. This is why the work sometimes gets harder before it gets easier. Not because the teaching is wrong, but because the ego is fighting for its existence at the only level it can, the level of fear, guilt, urgency, and doubt. Hold the new state anyway, not because it is comfortable, not because the evidence already confirms it, but because you now understand what the evidence is, the return of an old command, the echo, not the current truth, the reflection of where you were, not where you are choosing to be now. The mirror will catch up. The mirror always does. That is the law the ego hides. And now you have seen it. Let's bring this together, because what has been covered in this teaching is not a collection of interesting ideas. It is a complete map of the hidden mechanism that has been running your experience from below the surface of your conscious awareness. And a map is only useful if you know how to read it. So, let's read it clearly. The ego is not your enemy. It is a mask, a structure of identity built from accumulated assumptions, wounds, separations, and defenses that became so familiar they were mistaken for the face. The ego does not announce itself. It operates from within your own voice, your own memory, your own most habitual way of reading the world. Its central function is to convince you that the outside world is the cause of your inner experience. This is the inversion. This is the reversal that generates suffering and sustains it. The mechanism the ego uses to maintain this inversion is projection. The inner state, whatever is being held at the level of the deepest assumption, is cast outward onto the world and experienced as the world's independent reality. You do not see a person and then feel threatened. You inhabit a state of threat and then encounter a person who becomes the screen for that state's display. You do not meet rejection and then feel unworthy. You carry an assumption of unworthiness and then encounter a situation that confirms it. The projection is the cause. The reflection is the evidence. And the ego presents the evidence as the cause. That inversion is the hidden law in reverse. When you fight the reflection, when you argue with the mirror, defend against it, chase it, beg it to change, or punish yourself for what it shows you, you are operating inside the ego's framework. You are accepting its terms. And inside its terms, you are powerless because you are always at the mercy of what the mirror shows next. The moment you withdraw the projection and return to the inner state as the cause, you step outside the ego's framework entirely. The operant power returns to you, not as a philosophy, but as a living capacity to choose the state from which your reality is expressed. The inner operation is not a set of techniques to add to your daily routine. It is a fundamental reorientation of where you look for the cause. It is the practice of recognition, witnessing the state, relocating causation, entering the new assumption, and holding it through the ego's inevitable attempt to reclaim its position. This practice does not require perfection. It requires consistency. It does not require you to never fall back into the old state. It requires you to recognize the falling back and return again to the inner cause, each time with a little less drama and a little more certainty that the place you are returning to is yours. What you are doing, at the deepest level of what this teaching describes, is mistaken identity correction. The ego is the misidentification of yourself as the mask. The return to inner causation is the recognition that the awareness beneath the mask, the I am, the pure fact of your consciousness, was never limited, never wounded, never actually separated from the wholeness the ego claims you have lost and must work to recover. You are not recovering something that was taken from you. You are uncovering something that was never absent. The ego has been covering it, and now you have a description of how. We have arrived at the moment in this teaching where the inner work becomes a declaration. And I want to invite you to do something that may feel small, but is not small. I want you to drop a comment below this video, and I want that comment to be a single sentence. Not a response to the content, not a question or a reaction, a declaration, a statement of the new identity you are choosing from this moment forward. Here is what I mean by that. Everything you have heard in the past 40 or so minutes has been building toward one recognition. You are not the mask. You are not the ego's story about what happened to you and what that means about who you are. You are the awareness beneath it, the I am, the operant power, the inner cause. And that recognition deserves to be spoken, written, committed to, even if only in a single sentence in a comment section. Because declarations are not merely symbolic, they are inner commands. They are the moment the new state announces itself. So your comment, your mantra, should say something like this: I am the inner cause, not the reflection. Or perhaps, I do not fight the mirror, I return to the state. Or simply, the cause is within me, and I am returning to it now. Whatever form feels most true to what shifted in you during this teaching, write that. Make it short. Make it in the first person. Make it a statement of identity, not a description of what you are trying to achieve, but a declaration of what you are recognizing yourself to be. Why does this matter? Because the moment you write that declaration, even anonymously, even on a screen in a comment section, you have moved the teaching out of the category of information you consumed and into the category of identity you are beginning to inhabit. The ego keeps things abstract. It prefers that teachings remain in the realm of the interesting and the inspiring, safely contained inside a video, never actually applied to the self that is watching. The declaration breaks that containment. It brings the teaching into the body, into the language, into the specific lived territory of your actual identity. And there is something else. When others read your declaration, they are reading a mirror, a different kind of mirror than the one the ego constructs, a mirror in which they see their own emerging recognition reflected back by someone who is taking the step they are considering. The comment section beneath a teaching like this is not a passive space. It is a field of collective inner work, and your single sentence contributes to that field in ways that are not visible but are not unreal. So do not scroll past this. Do not save it for later. Write the sentence now, while the state that has been building through this teaching is still active in you, while the mask is still slightly loosened, while the awareness beneath it is still breathing in this space without its full weight restored. Declare the inner cause. Declare the identity that is not defined by the mirror. Write it below and read what others have written, because you may find that someone before you already said the thing you most needed to read. You are not here by accident, and you are not in a comments section by accident either. You are in a moment of choosing who you are from the inside. Make that choice visible, even if only to yourself. At the beginning of this teaching, I told you there is a part of your mind that does not want you to be free. And I told you it speaks with your voice. I want to return to that now, because by this point, you have seen enough of its mechanics that the statement means something different than it did 45 minutes ago. The ego was not wrong to form. It was a response to real experiences of separation, vulnerability, and pain. The mask did not appear without cause. At some point, the mask was a reasonable adaptation. The protection was real, even if the prison was also real. What the ego could not tell you, what it was structurally incapable of telling you, is that the protection stopped being necessary long before you stopped wearing it. That the wound it was guarding has been available for healing far longer than the ego has been willing to admit. And that the world it constructed to justify its continued presence has been a reflection of that guarding, not the cause of it. You have now seen the law it was hiding. The world is not the cause. The inner state is the cause. The mirror reflects. The echo returns. The evidence confirms whatever assumption is being broadcast from the deepest level of your identity. And you, the awareness that has been listening to these words, the I am beneath the mask, you are not that assumption. You are the one who holds it. And what is held can be released. What is held can be replaced. Not with performance, not with forced optimism, but with the genuine occupation of a state that knows its own wholeness. There is another layer beneath this one. There always is. The ego has many rooms, and the teaching of inner causation, as profound as it is itself a doorway to something even deeper. The question of who or what is doing the choosing. The question of what the I am actually is when the mask is fully gone. The question of what remains when there is no longer a self that needs to be defended or a world that needs to be managed. That question is the next threshold, and if you are ready for it, stay close, because the next video will take you through that doorway and show you what is waiting on the other side.